Good Friday evening to you. My name is Regan Devines and thank you for being here with us on From the South. Before we begin, here are the headlines. A resignation by Brazil's Finance Minister Joaquim Levy, replaced by Planning Minister Barbosa. Another video has surfaced adding to the Venezuelan government's allegations of opposition board votes. And world leaders meet again to try to end the Syrian war. The details on these stories and more now. Who until today was Planning Minister of Brazil, Nelson Barbosa, has replaced Joaquim Levy as Finance Minister just a few hours ago. Levy resigned earlier after a series of disagreements with President Dilma Rousseff over budget cuts and austerity measures. New Finance Minister Barbosa is considered a leftist economist in much the same mold as Rousseff. He has been one of the strongest opponents of the aggressive austerity drive that Levy led in an attempt to regain the confidence of investors in an economy mired in its worst recession in a quarter of a century. The Inter-American Development Bank has announced that it will seek to provide Argentina with $5 billion in credits over the coming years. This just 1 week after the right-wing government of business-friendly Mauricio Macri took office. The country has been locked out of the global bond market since the default back in 2002. On Thursday, the peso plunged more than 26.5% after the new government floated the currency as part of a slew of free market reforms. Finance Minister Alfonso Prat Gay celebrated the announcement. He was the global head of the foreign exchange research at JP Morgan in the late 1990s, before leading Argentina's central bank between 2002 and 2004.
Si yo no lo hiciere, que Dios y la patria me lo demanden.
Members of Argentina's cultural movement are in a state of alert following the rise to power of right-wing President Mauricio Macri. During Macri's 8 years at the helm of the Buenos Aires city government, he persecuted the city's independent artists and the cultural centers where they perform, allegedly for health and security purposes. Performers say that they're being shut down because they are critical through their art of Mauricio Macri's policies. Only days after swearing in to become head of state, a cultural center was violently raided and shut down, while many of its members were arrested and even tortured. Telesuru's Leo Pabletti has more from Buenos Aires.
This is the Teresa Israel Cultural Center in the Buenos Aires neighborhood of Almagro, where independent bands offer live gigs, where underground theater comes to life, and where children come to learn how to read and write. All these activities happen in cultural centres like this one all across the country, where the well-being of the community is well and truly placed over profit. Organisers of this cultural centre say they have lost count of the times that Macri, as city mayor, has ordered their closure.
The problem is the persecution, the criminalization and the silencing which the Buenos Aires city government and now the national government under Macri offers when it comes to cultural expression with a critical message, but not just because of the content of a song or a theater play, but because it proposes a collective grassroots organization of the cultural scene. It proposes a participative and rebellious cultural scene.
Members of Argentina's cultural movement say that Macri will continue to persecute them from his new and more powerful role as president. They remain in a state of alert.
With Macri, there has always been a policy of cutbacks and shutdowns instead of the state being an active player that can identify deficiencies and difficulties and be a promoter of culture. Instead, it follows a marketplace logic, which determines that whatever is not within the bounds of what the government considers as commercially viable is left out. So we are very worried.
Early this week, a cultural centre called the Cultural Battle, located in the northern Buenos Aires suburb of Vicente Lopez, was raided and closed down by unidentified police officers during a live music show. The police officers, who did not have a valid warrant to carry out the raid, illegally detained everyone who was inside for 3 hours before violently pulling them out of the cultural centre. They were then taken to surrounding police stations where various methods of torture were applied against them.
During those 3 hours that we were detained inside the cultural center, we were continually bullied by the police officers. They said to us, "Your government is over and all of you are dead now."
It's very clear that they don't care about the lives of others. They don't care about human rights. I remember asking the police officers to respect our rights.
Members of this cultural centre say this raid, which happened only days into Mauricio Macri's term as president, is a sample of what's ahead. Leo Politegoduti, Telesur, Buenos Aires.
The government of Venezuela denounced on Wednesday a possible purchase of votes during the recent legislative elections. Now a video shared on social media allegedly shows Maracaibo's mayor, Evelyn Trejo de Rosales, distributing money from a vehicle to youths taking part in what appears to be a campaign act. Local media say the video was shot on December 15th. Nearly a third of Mexico's public spending comes from the sale of crude oil. With the continued lows in the price of a barrel, the government has had to dramatically alter public spending. Yet some analysts and opposition lawmakers argue that Mexican authorities are using the volatile economic climate to push through privatization policies. Our correspondent Clayton Kahn with more.
Price of Mexican crude oil has been hovering at 8-year lows of roughly $30 a barrel. That's way down from 2014 average of $90 a barrel. This, of course, is hitting Mexican public finances hard, but officials have nevertheless expressed optimism for the economy in the coming year.
In a complex and violent environment, the Mexican economy continues to grow more than the same period last year, at a greater rate than what was observed in the first semester of this year, and above the expectation of analysts.
However, according to some economists, the news does not translate into positive results for a large majority of the Mexican population. According to economist Gregorio Vidal, the government's strategy has been to further liberalize the economy, cut public spending, and ultimately open the door to further privatization. There's been widespread rejection of these policies. In recent weeks, congressional representatives have pushed legislation to overhaul certain government agencies and programs to allow participation from the private sector. Among these areas are arts and cultures agencies and the state workers' pension system. But some opposition lawmakers say it's just a Trojan horse to ultimately privatize these areas completely.
Les deja morir, por decir algo.
They allowed agencies to die, in a way. They stop funding them. The services deteriorate. And in the end, they say it's better to just privatize them, because the state company just doesn't work anymore.
Esa como empresa pública no funciona.
And for Vidal, the continuation of this political economy amid the current national and international economic climate will only increase the precarity of the labor market, exacerbating Mexico's already substantial inequality and generate further social conflict and violence. Clayton Kahn, Telesur, Mexico City.
Ecuador's President Rafael Correa is in Peru for the 9th binational meeting between the two countries. The meeting seeks to push the advances reached in border integration, security and environmental recovery. Correa attended the meeting with his counterpart Ollanta Humala with the aim of strengthening trade and connections between the two countries, but also seeking Peru's support in his attempt to join a trade agreement with the EU, Colombia and Peru.
Today, the bilateral relations between Peru and Ecuador are at their best. A few years ago, this was unthinkable. Two cabinets working on a single government for the benefit of our peoples, surpassing ancient conflicts that did so much damage to our people, always paying tribute to our patriots. Our Peruvian soldiers killed Ecuadorians in which they fell fighting for what they believed. How good we have passed those times, and we enjoy a peace that is in development for the benefit of all peoples. And in this binational meeting, we can move forward, making us more ambitious targets, so that both peoples will feel firsthand the benefits of peace and live in a tangible something that is agreed on, how to improve our policies, our border policies, and to exchange experiences to serve our people.
Poder ponernos de acuerdo en cómo mejorar nuestras políticas fronterizas, poder intercambiar experiencias que sí.
And in Peru's capital, Lima, a place of memory, tolerance and social inclusion has opened to honor victims of the bloody battle against the Shining Path rebel group that tormented Peruvians for nearly 2 decades. The center has a permanent exhibition of contemporary photographs, along with testimonials and even garments of people who died from the country's internal violence. Peru's Truth Commission estimated that some 69,000 people died or went missing in the conflict, one of Latin America's deadliest. The commission blamed the Shining Path for most of the killings and placed blame as well on state authorities for about a third. The government has allocated nearly $150 million to pay reparations to victims of violence. And here's a look of what's coming up. The third round of talks on Syria's future took place in New York City with hopes of ending the war. This story and more next.
Caracas, Havana, Mexico, Quito, Washington, wherever the newsmakers will be there. From watch it on telesurtv.net/English, Telesur, wherever the news, you'll be there. Rod Stars, G1, and Claudia de la Cruz are Rebel Diaz, hip-hop activists positioned within a history of political resistance through music. And you don't stop. They invite young people to express themselves about their social struggles. And you don't stop. Watch it on telesurtv.net/English, Telesur, wherever the news, you'll be there.
From London, an interpretation of current world politics as presented by the activist, writer and historian Tariq Ali.
The emergence of the United States as a global empire.
The world today, only on telesurtv.net in English. Wherever the news, you'll be there.
Spain's political leaders have closed their campaigns 2 days ahead of Sunday's presidential elections. Newcomer parties like Podemos and Cuidadomonos are expected to burst into the elected government to break with 40 years of two-party predominance. With 1/4 of voters still undecided, opinion polls give the triumph to ruling Conservative Popular Party, but it would fall well short of an absolute majority. This would lead to necessary pacts to form a government. Both the Socialist Party and Podemos have rejected a pact with the Popular Party. Cuidadomonos had previously announced the same, but this Friday its leader Albert Rivera has said he might abstain to prevent a pact of what he called losers. 17 nations sat together in New York with the intention of bringing an end to the Syrian war, which by all accounts is about 5 years old. This is now the third gathering of nations in which all have a significant stake, and as predicted, it was not smooth sailing. Foreign ministers struggled to deal with how to resolve 3 main issues, namely which groups in Syria are to be defined as terrorist groups, also whether the new bloc of Syrian opposition groups that met in Saudi Arabia last week will be recognized, and also the fate of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad.
Thank you.
And speaking of President Assad, Syria's opposition factions want him removed from power. At the last Syria meeting in November, world powers had outlined a plan for a political process in Syria that would lead to elections within 18 months. It includes a nationwide ceasefire and 6 months of talks beginning in January between Assad's government and the opposition, and forming a unity government.
A transitional governing council with full executive powers. We are going into negotiations on this principle. We are not entering talks based on anything else. There will be no concession on the aims of the revolution and the decisions of the international legitimacy.
A U.S. spending bill worth over $1 trillion has been passed by both chambers of Congress, which is expected to fund the government through to September 2016. it will soon be signed by the president. The vote passed in the House by 316 to 113, then in the Senate by 65 to 33. Parts of the package include extending tax breaks and lifting a 40-year ban on exporting American crude oil. The vote prevents a shutdown this week as the government's current funding was scheduled to expire on December 23rd.
If you would have told me this year that we'd be standing here celebrating the passage of an omnibus bill with no poison pill riders at higher levels above sequester than even the president requested, I wouldn't have believed it, but here we are. This bill is a great victory for the principles Democrats stand for.
The Intifada continues. Palestinians burned tires and threw rocks toward the border with Israel, demanding that their rights and land be returned to them. This took place in the Gaza Strip by the Nahal Oz checkpoint. They said that the Intifada will carry on and that they will keep supporting their brothers in the West Bank and in Jerusalem. Elsewhere, Palestinians dressed up as Santa Claus and marched through Bethlehem, and this happened before clashing with police officers. About 14 of them were injured in the process. They did this during a Papa Noel procession, reportedly offering candies and sweets to the Israeli troops in the northern entrance of Bethlehem city. The Israeli soldiers responded with stun grenades, tear gas, and rubber-coated steel bullets. Reports are that several more Palestinian youngsters were also involved in the confrontation. Meanwhile, Gazans are afraid that they will be dragged into another round of violent fighting with Israel. Telesul's Noha Razin explains.
Militants in Gaza Strip opened fire Wednesday towards an Israeli vehicle which was patrolling the border fence in Khan Yunis' southern Gaza Strip, causing no injuries. According to Palestinian sources, 3 Palestinians were injured in the incident after the Israeli troops fired back 6 artillery shells towards the fire source. This escalation and the ongoing violence in occupied Jerusalem and the West Bank is becoming very similar to circumstances leading to the 2014 Israeli Operation Protective Edge against Gaza Strip, which began when a group of Israeli settlers burned alive 16-year-old Mohammed Abu Khdeir from East Jerusalem in July 2014. At the time of Israel's 2014 offensive, the burning of Abu Khdeir outraged the Palestinians in both Gaza Strip and the West Bank, while the resistance groups in the coastal territory retaliated by striking southern Israel with a barrage of missiles. An escalation which developed into a 51-day of deadly fighting between Gaza militants and the occupation state.
I'm scared that if a new war breaks out in Gaza as a result of the violent clashes between the Palestinian protesters and the Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank and Jerusalem, the Israeli government can never be trusted.
We don't know fear, but the current events signal there will be a new war. The Jews cannot be trusted in wars. We are already living in war. Life in Gaza is real war.
However, Gazans are divided in opinion over the probabilities of the eruption of a new war. The majority fear to be dragged to a confrontation with Israel, especially that the ceasefire agreement seems to be at the verge of collapse. Others have no room for fear and believe that the resistance groups have the right to respond to the Israeli violations no matter what. Noha Razin, Telesul TV, Gaza.
Here's a look at other news stories around the world.
Mother Teresa is about to be made a saint. This was confirmed by Pope Francis himself, who acknowledged that 2 miracles occurred because of her, a necessity for one to be labeled a saint. Mother Teresa died in 1997 at the age of 87 and was the founder of the Missionaries of Charity that helped the poor on the streets of Calcutta. Ethiopia has been experiencing some of its worst violence in a decade. This is a result of weeks of protests sparked by a government plan to allocate farmland near Ethiopia's capital. The government is attempting to transform the country's farming communities into new infrastructure to attract investment. Dozens are said to have died in the violent protests. And Niger's president says his administration has foiled a coup attempt.
Indeed, the government has foiled an unfortunate attempt to destabilize our institutions. The aim of these individuals, driven by an unknown motivation, was to overthrow democratically elected institutions using means put at their disposition by people who ensure their safety.
The president added that the main authors behind the plot have all been identified and arrested, with the exception of a single person who is on the run.
On Thursday, the World Surf League title was won in Hawaii by Brazilian Adrian de Souza. De Souza dedicated his title to the late Brazilian surfer Ricardo dos Santos. The World Surf League competition is said to be the most important day of the year for professional surfers. The 28-year-old rose to the top of the sport from humble beginnings in Sao Paulo. He also sends much of his prize money back to his family there. And that's it from us this evening. For more on these and other stories, you can visit us on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter. And for extensive coverage of developing stories, there is our website, telesurtv.net/English. For our news teams in Quito, Ecuador, and right here in Caracas, Venezuela, my name is Regan Veens. Have a great evening and an even better weekend. Bye.